Help support Name Explain by liking this video, leaving a comment and subscribing to the channel. We have many ways of breaking down time, from minuscule things like seconds and minutes, to longer ways we encompass the passing of times with days, weeks, months and years. However, there is another way, between months and years, that the passing of time has been broken up, and that's with the seasons of the year. The word season itself seems to have a pretty fitting etymology, deriving from the Latin sationum, which means a sowing or planting. And like I said, this makes sense as it relates to growing plants and sowing seeds. I imagine this etymology derives from the world of farming, in which the seasons of the year are important to know for what to plant and for what seeds to sow in what part of the year, though my knowledge of when farmers plant what seeds in what seasons only comes from sinking way too much time into Stardew Valley. Unlike weeks and months, which are somewhat man-made constructs, seasons are completely natural things that planet Earth goes through. Seasons are defined as being the main periods into which a year can be divided, and which each have their own typical weather conditions, though I feel the other key characteristics of a season include the temperature, what plant life is growing, and the amount of sunlight during the day. Seasons happen due to the world spinning on its axis. However, Earth's axis is slightly tilted, and this means that throughout the year a different part of the world is receiving a different amount of sunlight, in turn creating the seasons of the planet. If the Earth wasn't on this 23.5 degree tilt and at 90 degrees instead, the sun would rise and set at the exact same time each day and seasons simply wouldn't be a thing. Earth as we know it would be seriously different and we might not even be here. Whoever thought that a measly 23.5 degrees would be so vital for our survival? The four seasons are spring, summer, autumn and winter. However, these don't happen at the same time around the world. Specifically, the northern and southern hemisphere of Earth have their seasons opposite to each other. In the northern hemisphere, spring lasts from March to May, summer from June to August, autumn from September to November, and winter from December to February. However, in the southern hemisphere, spring is from September to November, summer is from December to February, autumn is from March to May, and winter is from June to August. What I find interesting about this is that the names of the seasons aren't dictated by the time of year, but rather the weather happening at that time. In England, we call the season that happens over the months of December to February winter, while in Australia they call the season that sits in these 3 months summer. It's not like the months of December to February are called winter around the entire globe and Australians associate the term with sunshine, while Brits associate it with blistering cold. And while seasons on the whole are dictated by their 3 months, there are more specific days that it's thought that seasons start on, especially from an astronomical definition. These are the 2 solstice and equinox days. The solstice days mark the time of the year when the sun is at its highest or lowest point, in turn creating the longest and shortest days of the year. These are the summer solstice, the longest day, that happens usually between the 20th and 21st of June, and the winter solstice, the shortest day, which usually happens around the 21st or 22nd of December. Of course, however, these are inverse in the southern hemisphere, with the summer solstice happening in December and the winter solstice happening in June. The word solstice itself comes from the Latin sol, meaning sun, and the term sistere, meaning stand still, as on the solstice day, it can seem like the sun is standing still in the sky. An equinox is when the sun shines directly onto the equator and the lengths of the day and night are equal. These are the spring and autumn equinoxes, and the spring one usually happens on the 20th of March and the autumn one happens around the 22nd and 23rd of September. And yes, once again these are reversed in the southern hemisphere, where the spring equinox happens in September and the autumn equinox happens in March. Of course, the defining feature of the equinoxes is that the day and night are equal. Well, pretty much. And this is where the word origin comes from, as equinox comes from the Latin equinoxium, meaning equality of night and day. Anyway, let's actually look into how these 4 seasons got their names, starting with what is considered the first of the 4 seasons, spring. Initially, however, this season had a different name in Old English, Lent. This original name is thought to come from the West Germanic langittenas, meaning the lengthening of the days. As it's in spring, the days start to get longer. While we no longer use this name for the season, the name Lent itself still lives on as the name for a period of time between Ash Wednesday and Easter, in which people tend to give up something they enjoy, which takes place in the season of spring. Well, at least in the northern hemisphere anyway. Of course though, the name Lent didn't stick around. It was sometime in the 14th century that this season started to be called the springing time. It was called this due to the fact that it was this time of the year that the plants and flowers would start to appear at the ground, or spring at the ground I ought to say. While we tend to see the word spring as a noun with the season named spring and the object/toys called spring, spring can also be a verb. As a verb it means to jump up or move in a quick fashion, and it was this verb spring that the season was named after, because in spring the flowers spring. After spring we have summer. Unfortunately, summer's etymology isn't as interesting as spring's. It simply comes from the Old English summa, and from there into more obscure origins. I've read that it's thought to ultimately originate from the Proto-Indo-European sem, meaning together and one. Why exactly this, however, I'm not too sure. I mean, when I think of summer, I think of everyone coming together, but I don't think people of the past were thinking about summertime barbecues when they coined this word. However, a season with much more of a story behind its name, or names I ought to say, is autumn. Initially in Old English, this season was called harvest, which derives from an Old Norse word meaning to gather and pluck, relating to the idea of collecting all the foods you have grown over the spring and summer. Personally, I really like this name. Harvest is just a cool word in my opinion. If I had more social media clout, I'd definitely get #BringBackHarvest trending, but someone else can do it. While we don't call this season harvest anymore, harvest and its various forms like harvested and harvesting still live on as verbs, which mean collecting what you have grown. And of course it's in the name of another farming video game, Harvest Moon. Man, I should do a Stardew Valley or Harvest Moon let's play or something, that'd be sick. The name autumn however came to English from the old French autumni, which comes from the Latin autumnus. We aren't really too sure what this means, but some think it relates to the Latin augura, meaning to increase, perhaps relating to the increase in food you have when it's all been harvested, though that's just my own idea. Autumn itself has also spawned an adjective unto itself, autumnal, which means something is autumn-like. Though, as well as the outdated harvest and the currently in use autumn, there's another name for this season, that being fall. We aren't too sure on the origin of this name, but it's pretty much accepted that this name is a reference to leaves falling from trees in this season. The name fall for this season seems to have come into being in the 16th century in England and boosted in popularity in the 17th century, and it was also at this time the name travelled to North America. Though the name fell out of popularity in the UK, fall has remained a popular name in the United States. And finally we have winter, which much like summer hasn't got the most exciting story behind it. Winter comes from the old Germanic wentrlos, which is thought to mean things like wet and wind and white, all things that come to mind for me when I think of winter. And that's all for the seasons' names explained, though of course only their names in English. I'd love to hear what the seasons are called in your language, and of course what season is it while you're watching this video. As this video is coming out in early September, you could be like me watching it in the northern hemisphere, where you could see autumn starting to approach, or maybe you're in the southern hemisphere, finally welcoming spring. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Name Explain depends on small monthly donations from fans like you to help keep the channel running. Just the small amount of $2 a month helps in a huge way, grants you patron exclusive Name Explain extras, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you.